Hello everyone, welcome to Dr. Prim's Thought Space. I am Primrose Jikombarero Joylene Bima and I create content about research, career development and wellness. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about a regret that I have in my heart today. I will be speaking to you about why I regret quitting my dream job in diplomacy. So please note that I might get emotional at some point, but I am doing this take for the third time. So I think I've dealt with some of the emotions and this will go a bit more smoothly. I don't think that anyone should at all limit themselves by saying that, oh, I want to work for a particular organization, or I want this particular role in my life, or I want to be in this particular sector for the, entirety of my career. I think that being flexible is important, particularly in the current career climate. It is no longer the case that most people follow a linear pathway. So where you feel the urge or the need to pivot into something else or into another organization, do not hold yourself hostage because you don't want to fail the dreams that you had in the past. Now, I know this sounds contradictory because here I am saying I regret a decision, but I'm also saying that my orientation is basically that one should never feel obliged to follow just one pathway or to carve one dream job or one dream, organization to work for and so forth. So I'll be looking down from time to time because I have notes and I don't want to miss any of my key points that I've written down. I will be starting from a very young age. So I did not know about this dream job from when I was young. So if you came to me at the age of 10 and asked me what you want to do in life, I'll probably tell you I want to be a businesswoman. I think that's, the response I gave to many people during my primary school years. And then when I was now a teenager, all I knew is that I wanted to write. Some point, I know I wanted to become a screenwriter, but I then developed a deeper passion to be in international relations. And I then wanted to become Secretary General of the United Nations. All right, so let me take you back to the year 2002. I was 10 years old then and a very observant child at the time. I used to walk to school and I used to walk back home. And I used to look at other students and just observe the forms of transport that came to drop them off or collect them, whether it was taxis or just private cars. And there was this one vehicle that caught my attention several times, to the extent that I asked the student who used to be picked up by this vehicle to say, why does your number plate look like this? So the number plate had 2 digits and then CD and then 2 other digits. I still know those numbers off by head because it was so intriguing and it's a number plate that remains etched in my memory. So this boy says to me, oh, my father is a diplomat. And in the moment, I didn't want to probe further. I didn't want to feel like I was not smart enough to know what a diplomat was if my fellow classmate was using the word. So I was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. That's so cool. Tell me about it. So I already knew that this person was not a Zimbabwean citizen. And so I put one and one together and literally said, okay, so the father is working in Zimbabwe, representing their particular country. And of course, they're rich because of the type of car that is coming to pick this guy up. And he's got a driver for that matter. So I became friends with this boy over time and got to know a lot more about diplomacy. And while I didn't make the decision to say I want to be diplomacy one day, I definitely started admiring people that had, family backgrounds where someone was a diplomat. Okay, we moved to another time in primary school. It was during a drought, and there were some people that used to come through with this product called maheu, a healthy drink, mainly made out of maize. And I wanted to do the work that they were doing because I've always been fond of organizations and people that do charity work. So, of course, I'm not saying that the UN isn't a charity, but for me, that response to a human need in times of crises is what I also wanted to do in future. And also, having read Elizabeth Nyamayaro's book, I Am a Girl from Africa, I totally understand that I'm not the only person who, has been intrigued in this lifetime by someone who represents either aid agencies or international organizations, because she wanted to work for the UN because she had been at the receiving end of relief from a person who was serving in her community during also a time of drought. So I did not know that UN was linked with diplomacy to some extent, but that was also another seed that was sowed within me. I am saying all this because the reality is that we dream based on our exposure most of the time. So exposure in the form of the careers and professions that people spoke about in terms of what their parents were doing, but also exposure in terms of what I would have, watched on television and what I would have, gained from engaging with people in church and other, institutions, social institutions in society. And I think my world was limited to a large extent. Most of the people I knew who were adults were soldiers, nurses, doctors, police officers, a lot of teachers. And I knew that I did not want to be like them. But what the alternative looked like is something that I did not conceptualize until later on in life. All right. I've spoken about, my classmate and the CD number plate. I have now spoken about the United Nations people and the work that they were doing, sure that, kids continue to go to school and that they can pay attention with well-fed minds. Now, later on in life, I moved to the Kingdom of Lesotho after my ordinary level exams. I was 16 at the time, and I went to study at an international school. This was a groundbreaking change in my life. I know I've said this in another video that growing up, I thought that, the linear pathway that I had to follow was get an education through primary, secondary, and high school, go to the University of Zimbabwe, get married, have a family, raise my children, and live to a ripe old age and die. But leaving the country and going to the international school showed me a whole other side of life. I had to learn a lot about a new country, and I was exposed to students who came from different walks of life in terms of their nationalities and also in terms of their cultural backgrounds, and more importantly, in terms of the backgrounds of their parents professionally. Yes, there were students who were like my parents are doctors, my parents are nurses, just like my mother, she was a nurse. But I came across a lot of students whose parents were diplomats or were people who were working in international organizations, your World Bank, your IMF, your United Nations, and other organizations that, are not on like the tip of my fingers right now. And it got me thinking, right? I also was in a state of mind that while I was grappling with trying to learn about these people's backgrounds, a lot of people asked me so many ignorant questions about Zimbabwe. And I grew this passion to want to educate people about where I was coming from. And I also wanted to understand where they were coming from as well. So I remembered about the United Nations for some reason. I think I was triggered by the name Kofi Annan. And that to me was proof that a black person could make it to the highest ranks in the UN. Fair enough, he was a man, he was from Ghana. But for me, I think that racial aspect spoke volumes. I then started researching the United Nations. I was now exposed to the internet, used to go to the internet cafe a lot because we didn't have internet at home. And I used to also use, of course, the computers at school when I could access them in the library or in the computer lab. And that was the time that I found out about a woman called Asha Rose Migiro. I also just stumbled upon information about Model United Nations societies. Now, what happened was when I was doing what is called the International Baccalaureate Diploma, IB Diploma, we were required to do 150 hours. So, of 50 creativity, 50 action oriented, and 50 service. So, for my 50 hours of creativity, I was part of the school yearbook club. I was also part of Fabrics of Rhythmics Poetry Club. And then for service, I used to go to MIS Orphanage where I would assist with taking care of children, cooking, cleaning, and whatever it is that was needed at the time. Now, for action oriented activities, many people did sports, but taking initiative to start something was also considered as part of action. And I went wild with my dreams. Remember, I wanted to understand others, and I also wanted others to understand me. And I was around young people, most of whom came from diplomatic backgrounds. So I quickly thought about establishing a model United Nations society at the school. I then spoke to my history teacher about this idea. He was excited about it and told me to write, a proposal slash concept note so that we could submit it to the headmaster's office, have a meeting with the headmaster, and get approval. And that process was smooth because I was overconfident. Wrote the proposal. My history teacher was excited about this, and so we approached the headmaster, who had, quite the conversation with me and was intrigued by how much I was invested in this idea. Of course, they worried that maybe not many students would buy into this, but I was aware that also, some students needed the 50 hours of action-oriented work, so they would definitely come to the table. Once approved, I had my history teacher as the faculty advisor, also approached my English teacher and my business teachers so that they could also act as support staff. Advertised the society, memberships ran wild, people participated, and we had our model UN, which ran also very smoothly. And during this time, I continued to educate myself because if I was going to stand as founder and secretary general of the society, I had to be the know-it-all. At least that's what I thought. And I told myself that one day I could actually become a secretary general. Now, I then pursued, of course, international relations at the University of Cape Town, which I paired up with public policy and administration and added a third major in the form of, gender and transformation. At the University of Cape Town, I wanted to continue with this whole model UN involvement. Fortunately, the university had a United Nations Association of South Africa, chapter. So I joined it. I was part of it. We did further diplomatic training. And I think that was the only society I joined during my university years because that's what made perfect sense to me. So while part of UNASA, I decided to run for the executive committee, I think in my second year, and I flunked. I wanted to be the head or the deputy. I did not want to, put my hand up for another role. Anyway, didn't lose hope. When I was now in my final year of undergraduate studies, I told myself that I was actually going to strategically apply for the role of head academic chair. Foremost because research, writing, and training others were key strengths. And I know that a lot of people don't want to take up that role. So within the executive committee, that's the role that I decided, you know what, I'll run for this position and I know I'll get it. And of course, I got it. So in true Dr. Prim style, I definitely flourished in that role. Let's fast forward because I could spend the whole day on this story. Went on to pursue my honors in gender and transformation and then a master of social science in international relations. And at this stage, I told myself, foreign policy, working in international organizations, those were my key interests. What made it worse was when I was doing my master's, there were some classes where I was literally the only person that never had any work experience. And I was surrounded by people that had worked in the military at high levels, people that had worked in diplomacy in different countries. So I was convinced that I too would make it into such circles. Now, I started looking for work opportunities mostly in 2017. It was difficult. I did get a role as a regional analyst. I spoke about this in a previous video for political economy Southern Africa. And that further cemented the idea that, I was capable of doing work that speaks to global governance or international economic relations. So after my master's, I didn't get a job. I went back home. I started looking for opportunities, paid and unpaid. Ended up doing an internship at Caritas Internationalis, Caritas, in Manzini, Eswatini, where I was working for the refugee section. What I loved the most about being at Caritas was I was working on a program that included interactions with representatives from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, interactions with people from the International Organization of Migration, IOM, working with people from, the World Food Program as well, amongst other examples. So I just thought, God is really working towards my entry into diplomacy or into the UN system. Continued applying a lot for jobs in that area. I got a UN interview. I won't name the agency. I passed the written exam and I passed an oral exam. Now, when it came to checking of documents and whatnot, the human resources officer of this particular organization says to me, "Your surname doesn't sound like you're from Eswatini." It was Swaziland back then. "But you have an ID. Can you take me through that?" So I explained to him that in Eswatini, if you are a temporary resident, you had to get an ID. So I have had an ID, still have an ID, but it is, of course, written non-Swazi. And then he says to me, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. These jobs are for citizens. So in as much as you wrote the best piece and you gave us a good interview, we have to end things here." 25-year-old me was shattered, 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 shattered. And I remember crying a lot those days. I would cry while doing the dishes. I would cry myself to sleep because finally I could write compelling cover letters. My CV was great and I could convince an interview panel that I was the best person for the job, but still not end up getting the job. I was like, I just want to go back home. I want to go back to my country because clearly, if the only way into the UN is through my country, I'm going to have to find a way. So fortunately for me, it wasn't the UN, but I got shortlisted to participate in an interview process to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. Went there. I studied extremely diligently towards that process. I think I left no stone unturned. My national knowledge, my knowledge of the Southern African region, my knowledge of Africa, my knowledge of global political relations, everything was on point. And I poured everything out, ink on paper. I think I probably wrote the longest response papers. And I went all in when it came to just unpacking concepts and also speaking about different case studies to show how much I knew. And then I did my panel interview. That too was amazing. My legs were shaking under the table the whole time, but my mouth, I was not trembling. And I got selected as part of a group of about, I think there were 8 or 10 of us that were selected. And I knew then that I was in the right place. Told myself, I'm in diplomacy now, the highest level actually, because foreign policy stems from, interactions between the president, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and of course the diplomats that work under the Minister of Foreign Affairs and all these other officials. And That entry level role as an administrative officer was going to be step number one. Now, traditionally, you progress, I think it takes about maybe 10 years or even more to become senior and maybe even take up roles as a director, maybe director general, secretary general of an intergovernmental organization, and you can apply for so many other roles. You can even pivot from a government job in diplomacy to actually working for the UN. Now, this is a job I quit after 18 months. So, for context, you do 12 months of probation. So, basically, in the first year, I was making sure that I put all my effort into impressing at all levels with my writing. What I also did strategically with the interview for that role was I knew that a lot of people don't like roles that involve a lot of extensive writing and a lot of in office time. Because, of course, in diplomacy, you see that people have to travel a lot. But I was okay with spending my first year doing the work that needed to be done to ensure that we write the best briefs for the minister, for the head of state, for the permanent secretary. And I said that my preferred space was going to be in policy research. And of course, I got that. And I made sure that I excelled in that role. Now, for confidentiality purposes, of course, I won't say much about, anything else that involves that job, except what leads to today's conversation. Why did it become my dream job? I remembered my primary school friend's father's number plate. And now I was being trained on the reality that one day I would have a car that has such a number plate. I knew that we would work with several international organizations, for example, partnerships in times of disaster and risk management. Started remembering, the interactions with UN people when they were bringing relief food, when they were bringing my hairwood to my primary school. And then I just said, oh my goodness, this is where God was taking me. I wanted to become a diplomat, one day become Ambassador Ima. But a lot happened. A lot happened in the sense that while I was unemployed and looking for a job, I had also applied for PhD. I needed funding and I needed a supervisor. So on the day that I received the confirmation that I passed my interview at Foreign Affairs and I should come and start within the next few days, I also received confirmation of funding from the University of Cape Town. I already had a PhD place, but I needed funding. So my dilemma was, do I go to school and forfeit this job offer that I know came after so many months of crying, so many years of conditioning myself for international relations, and after heartbreak from that revoked offer in Eswatini? So I decided that I was going to take both opportunities and deal with the repercussions. Now, the blows came so fast. So, first year of PhD, all you have to do is to work towards the development of your proposal. At least that was the case for me. And I wrote 2 drafts in that year, which my supervisor rejected and said needed a lot more work. And he also had identified that, because of my diplomatic orientation, obviously I was spending a lot of time at work and mostly doing my academic work on weekends, my writing had become less academic, and that became problematic because I was writing on a topic that is linked to foreign policy. And in academia, you are supposed to exercise academic rigor, not necessarily objectivity, but I think with diplomacy, you become a bit clouded because you're working in a space where you are consistently endorsing and refining your particular country's foreign policy, in as much as you take into account the foreign policies of other countries. So my supervisor says to me, Try again. If the next time I don't like your proposal, I think we should just part ways. I cannot supervise you. Very sad. So I told myself, no ways. This man supervised me for my master's. He likes how I write, and he's been working on ensuring that I improve. I will definitely improve, but if I present my proposal and it passes, I'm going to quit my job. If I fail the proposal stage, however, I'm just going to quit the PhD and pursue a career in diplomacy. Now, I don't know why at 26 I gave myself such an ultimatum. And usually, when I make a decision, I stick to it. So, fast forward, March 2019, present my proposal, it passes. Immediately write my resignation letter and start paving way for myself to exit Zimbabwe and go to Cape Town. A very difficult decision. Yes, it was not painless, but it felt right. And I went back, of course, to the University of Cape Town. And as you know, I am now Dr. Prem, which means I excelled. And I loved the exit from foreign affairs to academia because I developed a passion for teaching. So as long as I could speak with other postgraduate students, contribute to course design, contribute to students' academic success, I was happy, even if the money was not a lot. So it's not like the money was a lot in diplomacy either. Anyway, I was just on a mission to hone new skills. And now my new dream job became professor of international relations. So basically, obviously, I had to rise up the ranks from tutor, teaching assistant, lecturer, and become, doctor, senior lecturer, professor, and so forth. Now, quitting foreign affairs is something that I regret because I've come to realize that I should have rather told myself that I would save up in future and pursue a PhD. But that would not guarantee that I would do the PhD through UCT. And that would not guarantee that I would do the PhD with the supervisor that I worked with at the time. And as I always preach, if you've got funding and if you've got a good university where a supervisor who knows your area works, go for it. So going back to UCT to further my studies was a no-brainer because those three key factors were satisfied. Now, what would I have become had I stayed a bit and then pursued my PhD later? I cannot tell. What I realized was that most people in the foreign service did not advance beyond their undergraduate studies. Some did go for master's degrees, but to a large extent, you didn't need to have a PhD. And I don't even think I needed to have a master's because I remember for the longest time in the role in that 1 year of probation saying, most of the time, the work that I have to do is less challenging if I think about the challenges I went through when I was doing my master's by coursework and dissertation in 1 year. So I had already established that in as much as the work was intriguing, it was not as intellectually challenging. Some people would say, isn't that the dream job? Unfortunately for me, that was not the case. And I think that is still not the case. So I also wanted intellectual independence because I quickly realized that whatever I write is merely an output for the ministry, for the government at best. I wanted to have my name as an author to something. And I realized that if I stayed in diplomacy, most of the information I would be receiving or doing research on would be information that had to remain classified within diplomacy, and I could then not share through writing papers. Or even if I wanted to do academic papers and go all academic, I would struggle because the time wasn't there, and my orientation mentally became increasingly just like diplomacy, diplomacy. So I think maybe I'm a failure in this regard because I've seen people who have juggled both diplomatic roles, and academia. So one of the thoughts I've always had is, why did I not try to do both? I think the answer is simple. My supervisor had given me an ultimatum, and I then gave myself an ultimatum. Do I place, part of the blame on them? Absolutely not, because I took this decision intentionally. And then when it came to telling myself I want to become a professor, I think I under planned. I think I had this misconception that it was going to be easy. I had no idea about the stats regarding how many people with PhDs are retained by the academic system. And I didn't factor in a lot of, um, you know, factors that I should have thought about, factor in factors, like my nationality, like the field of study, and also just the global realities around recruitment into academia. So, after my PhD, I quickly realized that it was not going to be easy to follow that path. And I think some of the seeds of regret came from that. Because when I actually resigned, so many people told me about how many people who leave this service regret it. You won't be able to excel and thrive in diplomacy if you try and do it from outside. All of that, all of that. And I think I came to realize that the closest I could then get to diplomacy was through writing academically or working through organizations that work with ministries of foreign affairs. But going in as an employee, number one, maybe it's possible, but I can't go and enter at junior level as is. Number two, if you're in foreign affairs, you're still a civil servant, and depending on the salaries in your country, you might want to think deeply about how best you would survive with the income that is given to people in particular roles. Of course, people's salaries increase as they go further up the ranks, or if you're deployed outside the country, or if you travel, and all these other factors, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. Now, I'm sharing all this because I am now 33, and in as much as I'm passionate about politics, political communication, still want to be Secretary General of the United Nations, I realize how much I need money to plan my life. I need money as an auntie, as an eldest daughter, eldest granddaughter, and also as a person who loves running and wants to invest in running and travel. So I also came to realize that the life that I live is probably not a life that I would have lived if I was a diplomat, just in terms of my interests. And also, even this YouTube channel where I'm talking to you, I would not have a public facing platform if I had remained in foreign affairs. I couldn't, of course, maybe vlog a day in the life of, a month in the life of, because that would expose me and, of course, become risky not only to myself, but, of course, to the ministry or to the government. So I think by choosing this pathway, I have sabotaged, by all means, maybe not intentionally, my chances of ever going back into that pathway. Now, I want to end this video on a very positive note to say, I don't think I made a mistake. I think that sometimes regret visits me when I'm at a time of loss, when I am looking for new opportunities, and my mind says to me, but you gave away the best opportunity you could ever have had. And I can't turn back the hands of time. I can only do better to ensure that I excel exceptionally at anything that I put my mind and heart to. And that's exactly how I am going to be living intentionally. And I think I've been living this way anyway, ever since leaving diplomacy. And I recorded this video today because I want this to be a moment of closure. If it so happens that I end up in foreign affairs for whatever reason, maybe I will be invited, whether as an expert advisor or invited at a higher level, I won't say no. I won't say no. It will literally be a no-brainer. So I'm also happy that the friends that I made during the time, Still pretty much talk to most of them. So I know friends in high places in diplomacy, basically, and I highly appreciate that. So I think also I love the fact that I did not burn any bridges. It is important. If you're thinking of quitting your dream job today, I think just think deeply about why you want to do it. And also decenter the idea of a dream job or a dream organization. I'm saying this because I know a lot of people in law or in accounting, for example, there are particular firms that they want to work for. Even with us in the social sciences, some people are just like, it's either the UN or nothing. And I think we need to stop thinking that way and also even think about how we can creatively develop our own. I'm starting this year, for example, as a podcast research and data lead. Unimaginable. I would never have thought that I would be the brains as well as the director behind a political campaigns podcast. But of course, I did work that, was geared towards that, and that has become an actuality. So I love that despite quitting my dream job, I retained the capacity to dream big and, of course, that zeal to always become excellent no matter what I choose in life. So I welcome you to do the same. And if you do encounter moments of regret, remind yourself that you don't need to hold yourself hostage for decisions that you made back then when you were probably less informed or when you thought you were doing what was best for you. That is all I have to say for today. Thank you for watching until the end. Please remember to like, comment, as well as to share for wider reach. I will see you in the next video. It's goodbye for now.